staying with us and welcome to our coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here are the headlines. Blasts hit Kiev in Ukraine as UN Chief Antonio Guterres visits. U.S. Congress revives World War II-era Lend-Lease program for Ukraine. And the federal government says Nigerian students whose programs were interrupted by the Russia-Ukraine conflict can continue studies online or in person. Hello again, and thanks for staying with us. Let's first bring you up to speed on the latest developments out of Ukraine in the last few hours. UK's Defense Ministry is reporting there is heavy fighting between Russian forces and Ukraine's forces in the eastern part of the country, particularly the Donbass region. The ministry says the Battle of Donbass remains Russia's main strategic focus. Now, earlier, Defense Secretary Ben Wallace said around 8,000 British Army troops will join a series of exercises across Europe this summer in one of the largest deployments since the Cold War. That training has been planned for some time now, but the scale of the exercise has been ramped up since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Also, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, which maintained an observational and monitoring mission in eastern Ukraine for years, has announced it is ending its long-running deployment. Moscow, as one of the group's members, vetoed an extension of the mission. The OSCE's special monitoring mission to Ukraine had been deployed since 2014, when conflict first broke out between Ukrainian troops and Russian-backed rebels. The OSCE was the only international organization which directly followed the conflict. And now we're caught up. We're also learning this morning Russia fired 2 missiles at the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, Thursday evening, one of them striking the lower floors of a residential building, injuring at least 3 people. According to Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko, the blast hit the central Shevchenko district. It posted online shortly afterwards that 3 people were taken to hospital. Press Secretary of the State Emergency Services, Svetlana Volaga, said the other missile hit an unnamed facility close to the residential building. The missile attacks were also confirmed by the Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov and Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, who said Russia used missiles in the attack. Emergency services rushed to extinguish the fires in the aftermath. Explosions occurred after UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres completed talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky, focusing on efforts to evacuate civilians from the Russian-besieged southern port city of Mariupol. In another development, a former senior executive at Russian lender Gazprom Bank says he fled Russia for Ukraine, hoping to take up arms against Moscow's invasion, and that he believes that President Vladimir Putin is leading the country to catastrophe. Igor Volobyev was recently a vice president at Gazprom Bank. During an interview recently, he said he had been moved to act because of his Ukrainian roots and his family. The public defection is extraordinary because of his senior role in the company that is at the heart of the Russian establishment and is chaired by Alexei Miller, the CEO of gas giant Gazprom, who is a close Putin ally.
Преданность Украине. Даже не Украине, а просто, знаете...
In the United States, one of Ukraine's strongest allies, the House of Representatives on Thursday voted overwhelmingly backing legislation that will make it easier to export military equipment to Ukraine, reviving the Lend-Lease Act that helped defeat Hitler during the Second World War. The House passed the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act of 2022 by 417 to 10, 3 weeks after it sailed through the Senate with unanimous support. Next, it goes to the White House for the president to sign into law. A measure revives a World War II era program that allows Washington to lend or lease military equipment to U.S. allies. In this case, it will help those affected by Russia's invasion, such as Poland and other Eastern European countries, as well as Ukraine.
The yeas are 417 and the nays are 10. The bill is passed.
As war rages in Ukraine, every minute matters. It's about time. This strong action could mean the difference between lives saved and lives lost. In any given battle, it could mean the margin between victory and defeat.
It is a real moment in history that we are back on this House floor supporting Lend-Lease, an idea that armed Britain in the face of the Blitz by the Nazis. But today we find ourselves in a very similar situation, with Putin systematically bombing and shelling the peaceful villages and cities of Ukraine.
Well, here in Nigeria, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says other countries with similar curricula with Ukraine have offered Nigerian students whose programs were interrupted by the Russia-Ukraine conflict admission to complete their studies, either online or physically. Permanent Secretary of the Ministry, Gabriel Aduda, says all admission processing will be conducted through the Nigerian missions to authenticate students who were previously enrolled into various programs. Former President of the United Nations General Assembly, Tijani Muhammad Bande, further asserts that Nigeria is willing to accept educational opportunities from Russia because both countries are not at war and there is the need to strategize a balancing act that is synonymous with diplomacy. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says Nigeria's relations with Ukraine remain in good diplomatic standing despite the Russian invasion. Joining me now is one of the Nigerians studying in one of the universities in Ukraine, in Kherson to be specific. Linus Bakar has been back for weeks now. Linus, thank you for joining me this morning.
Good morning. It's my pleasure.
Now, I know you must have heard, this communique. You may have read it online or probably heard it from, some of your colleagues or your friends. I understand that, you've not had any interruption to your schoolwork, except that you're just not there physically in Kherson.
Yes, no, I was studying in Sumy, not Kherson. Yes, we recently, I think 3 weeks ago, we started the online mode of study, and it's been good. Nothing has changed. It's just that we're not there physically, but we're taking test modules from the online platform.
Yeah, and that's just really different, isn't it? How are classes being set up? Do you have a schedule every day? A time when you sit down? Do you also get assignments and stuff like that? And then where are your lecturers?
Yes, normal schedules, normal school schedules. Nothing has changed. So every period we have classes. Of course, it's a bit kind of tough for medical students, but back in 2020, when the coronavirus was really, really high, we resorted to the same online platform. So it is nothing new, but it's very good. And most of our lecturers are still back in Sumy. The ones that I know of, they are still in Sumy. They didn't leave Sumy.
Does it feel a bit surreal, seeing your classmates from around the world? I mean, given, the circumstances under which you left, there was a war, of course, the Russian invasion, and then just a few months ago, your lives were really normal, and now then you had hopes of graduating. Speaking of which, is that still on course?
Yes. I think schools are working on seeing how the final year students can finish up. So from them, nothing has changed. It's normal study, just that it's just the online platform.
So it is interesting. Sumy hasn't really been in the news for a while now. I mean, I mentioned Kherson, and that's because, Russia claims to have taken over the city. But Sumy, there's hardly been any news, I think, ever since you came back. Haven't really heard anything, about the situation there. So what are you hearing as regards, what's been happening? the Russian attacks in the area, how civilians are, living their lives back where you were coming from just a couple of months ago.
Yes. Yeah. Just as you rightly said, Sumi has not been on the news because things are very, very calm. I have a lot of friends in Sumi, my teachers in Sumi, so we are communicating. In fact, from what they've told me, things are back to normal in Sumi. Just that they're saying it's not just safe for anyone to return yet, but I mean, life has gone back to normal in Sumi.
Have you been following, what's been going on in Ukraine with the Russian invasion? Because, apart from schooling, I mean, this was a place, if, given the right circumstances, you probably would have stayed on, furthered your studies, probably gone on to a doctorate or something else. Are you also following what's happening there, and you're seeing what's happening in the news, and you're reading, what's been going on? What are your thoughts on how far and how long this invasion has taken?
Yes, I've been following the news a lot. Just as rightly said, like for myself, I did my bachelor's degree, my master's degree there in Sumi. So there's some sort of attachment to the city and the country. Speaking of whether we will return soon or not, I really think since the so-called military operation has reached a stage to which they are in the eastern part of Ukraine. I think the other parts of Ukraine are relatively becoming safe. But of course, until there is a ceasefire, it is not safe for anyone to want to return yet. Even the authorities there are telling us that, yes, they hope that it all ends soon. But if not, we'll still be here pending when the whole thing ends.
So I noticed that you're being careful and you're saying a special military operation, and that's Russia speak for the invasion. Most people in Ukraine will call it, of course, a war, which is what it is. I mean, another country's forces invading your country is a war, and your forces are fighting those forces. You're Nigerian, so I suppose you stand on the fence on this. But given, what's been going on in Ukraine, perhaps if you had stayed back, Linus, would there have been anything, any role that you think that you could have played, during this crisis? Do you think that you may have, I don't know, maybe joined a volunteer group probably to help out with things, or probably even joined the civilian defense forces?
Okay, well, I use the word so-called military operation, of course. We all know that it is a war. We all know that it is really, really uncalled for, not in this century. If I was going to join, if I was in Ukraine, I mean, it is really, really relative, but I really think it is something that it is very pathetic because I have friends that have been affected by the whole war. And it will only move me to compassion to try to see what I can do humanly possible and not to meddle into the whole thing. But Ukraine has given some of us the education that we went there for. So I could have helped in one way or the other, but we're back in Nigeria, and I think it's really safe for us at the moment.
So I know that some of the Nigerian students stayed back in Europe. They went to other parts of Europe to continue their studies. Some stayed back in Poland, some in Germany, finding their way across Europe just to continue their studies. Many didn't come back, but you came back. And now the federal government says, that you can continue your education in other countries in Europe who have similar curricula with Ukraine. Is that a consideration for you?
Personally, I think at some point I would have to start considering it. But for now, I'm really optimistic that the war would end soon because I just have a year plus just to finish my PhD. So I would just have to wait a little bit. But if it's taking longer, I would have to start considering other options.
Yeah, but how is that? Because you say you're already continuing classes online. and then you're still hoping to graduate, but you said nothing really has changed because during the pandemic, this was the norm, right?
Yes, 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 yes. We classes, everything. I defended one of the papers I wrote the other day online, and it was just as almost as if it was physical. So we would continue the online mode. I will continue the online mode, depending when it is safe to return.
Okay, but it's possible your graduation will probably take place virtually. You do understand that, the way things are going. How do you feel about that?
Yes, it is very possible. Well, the world has changed, the world has evolved, and this is our reality now. I don't think it will it will change anything so long as I'm going to get my certificate. I think nothing has changed, and it is a valid certificate.
So, Lana, since you've been back, and I know that you've been taking classes online, what else have you been doing with your time?
Well, it's a good opportunity to be back. I mean, bonding with the family, trying to reconnect, because a lot of people that I know, it's really been a long time they returned to Nigeria. But me personally, I've been connecting more with families, relating with people, and just basically that's just it.
Yeah, but it might appear to some that you have perhaps a lot of free time on your hands. So what do you do with that time?
I don't really have full times like that, because most times classes are 5 hours or 4 hours, and then after that, of course, we have probably some assignments to do or a presentation to prepare for. So it's not as if there is a lot of free time like that.
Well, Linus, we won't pry too much into your private life. Thanks again for joining us this morning, and we wish you all the best and happy graduation in the near future.
Thank you so much.
Bulgaria's Prime Minister Kirill Petkov met with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Ukrainian capital city, Kiev, on Thursday. Petkov traveled to Kiev by train and then paid a visit to Borodyanka, a small town near Kiev that had been occupied by Russian troops over a month now. On Wednesday, Russian energy giant Gazprom said it had halted gas supplies to Bulgaria and Poland for failing to pay in rubles. The move was condemned by European leaders as blackmail and constitutes the toughest retaliation so far against international sanctions over the war in Ukraine. Still ahead on the program. Well, Bulgaria says regarding Russia halting gas supply, it can replace all of that. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, says Western countries are openly calling on Ukraine to attack Russia, adding that the West should take Moscow seriously when it says strikes on Russian territory will lead to a response. Russia reported a series of blasts in the south of the country and a fire at an ammunition depot on Wednesday, the latest in a spate of incidents that a top Ukrainian official described as payback and karma for Moscow's military actions against Kiev. Speaking at the weekly briefing for reporters, Zakharova also accused the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, of handing information on the location of Russian and pro-Russian forces to Western and Ukrainian intelligence. She did not provide evidence for that. Zakharova said investigators from the self-proclaimed breakaway Donetsk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine, which is backed by Russia, would provide additional proof. The OSCE has been monitoring the situation in eastern Ukraine since 2014, when Russian-backed separatists began fighting the Ukrainian army. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says Germany is preparing for the eventuality of Russia stopping its gas exports, given it can only speculate about what the Kremlin will decide to do. Scholz, who also announced that Germany would provide training in the country for howitzer tanks, said he welcomed the decision of the German parliament to approve a petition to deliver heavy arms to Ukraine. Germany's Bundestag lower house of parliament on Thursday voted overwhelmingly approving a petition on support for Ukraine backing the delivery of weapons, including heavy arms, to the country and helping it defend off Russian attacks. The petition was backed by both three parties in the ruling coalition, as well as the opposition Conservatives, passing with 586 votes in favor, 100 against, and 7 abstentions. That's according to the Bundestag Vice President, Wolfgang Kubicki. Earlier, we told you the UK's Ministry of Defence intelligence briefing reiterated that Russia's efforts are now on the eastern states of Donetsk and Luhansk, known as the Donbass region. It noted the fighting has been particularly heavy around Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, and that there had been an attempted advance southwards towards Slovyansk. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says around 8,000 British Army troops will be joining a series of exercises across Europe this summer, in one of the largest deployments since the Cold War. Our correspondent in London, Juliana Olaika, joins me now for more. Juliana, great to see you. Let's begin with the Defense Secretary's announcement, the deployment of 8,000 troops across Europe. It does connote, however, that Britain is preparing for eventualities with Russia, right?
Yes, good morning, Amarachi. It does appear, as we're entering into the third month of the war, that the dialogue and the sentiment from the West is shifting. And we heard this a couple of weeks ago after the Easter recess, when the Prime Minister was speaking at the dispatch box. And I think it's important to note that every single time the Prime Minister is speaking about Russia, he is very, very careful with his words, because, of course, Britain has found itself the leader of this Western alliance. And it started off with sanctions, but it's ever so more increasingly seeming to be a military partnership. That's what we're hearing from Russia. And certainly from this deployment yesterday, as you just mentioned, an 8,000 strong troop battalion being sent to the Estonian-Latvia border is increasing. I think if you listen to the headlines, it does appear that the West would like to believe that Russia is not gaining strength, but clearly that isn't the case. They are pushing forward, despite the fact that Ukraine is armed to the teeth by NATO allies' defence equipment, but still it is not relenting. So yes, Britain are sending this 8,000 strong troops to the border under an operation dubbed Exercise Hedgehog. They are going to be joining the 18,000 NATO forces that are currently on ground. And just to mention, Amarachi, something that's been reported quite heavily in the British press this morning, as it has been confirmed that the first British soldier has been killed in Ukraine. This is the first one that we know about. It's a 36-year-old man called Scott Silby. I believe he was once working with the British Army. We know very early on, in the beginning of the war, President Volodymyr Zelensky was calling on former soldiers from across the world, particularly in the West, to come and join the forces. many British soldiers were doing that, and we have had the confirmation yesterday evening that one British soldier has been killed on the ground, 36-year-old Scott Silby. Also as well, we're hearing that 2 British aid workers have also been captured. I'm sure it was discussed extensively on this show that there are also 2 British soldiers who are currently prisoners of war. How are Britain going to react to that? That is going to be a huge issue because, as you just said, we heard from the Russian spokesperson. We also heard from the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, saying that the West are getting a little bit too close. How far will Britain go in its defence, in its partnership with Ukraine, when the potential of a nuclear gunfire is certainly really high? So yes, 8,000 troops are being sent. We've had the confirmation that the first British soldier has died in Ukraine, and it is going to be really palpable now once we hear from Prime Minister Boris Johnson to determine just exactly how far Britain is prepared to go to ensure the safety of Europe.
Indeed, Juliana, that really changes everything, doesn't it? The approach to the war, which has been fought by proxy, and then the Russian president's threat to UK NATO allies, even to the United States, saying, you know, they will pay consequences for helping Ukraine. I know leaders are watching closely the Secretary General's visit to Turkey, to Russia, as well as to Ukraine. Shortly after Mr. Guterres' visit, there were airstrikes, missile strikes, beg your pardon, in Kiev. Has the UK government reacted to that? I mean, Prime Minister Boris Johnson was in Kiev just a few weeks ago. So has he said anything? And has the government responded, you know, to what's happened lately?
We're yet to get an official comment on the ground from either Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, or Downing Street. But as you said, yes, there was that shocking missile strike in Kiev just when the UN Secretary General was in town. I believe 3 people were wounded in that missile attack. And the Ukraine have called it a postcard from Russia. Zelensky said that this strike was an attempt by the Russians to humiliate the United Nations and their stance against this bombardment, and also to show that this war now and the negotiations with Russia are just not working. I think the West and the United Nations, particularly this historic visit by Guterres, would have potentially been able to deter Putin and to deter Russian soldiers. Clearly, that's not been the case.
You do seem to be having problems with Juliana's feed. Juliana,
thank
you.
There are very significant heavyweights that sit on the P5, that sit in the Security Council, that do not share the same sentiment as the West feel. India being one of them, China being one of them. Lots of British commentators were really upset that during Prime Minister Boris Johnson's visit to New Delhi for those diplomatic and economic talks with Narendra Modi, the Indian leader, that he didn't push him much harder on him trying to abate this significant crisis. But this is going to lead to some really hard questions about what happens next. We know that even President Joe Biden, who has been, I would say, less vocal in terms of trying to lead this alliance, he was urging Congress last night to put a further $36 billion into this fight with Russia. So no official statement on the record yet about these airstrikes in Kiev when they knew that Antonio Guterres was in town. But certainly it does show that the negotiations and the diplomatic approach that the West has tried to take thus far is not working, which is why we are now starting to see this change of tone We're seeing the deployments from troops on the ground. You mentioned the German parliament overwhelmingly passing that law to now start sending heavy military bombardments into Ukraine. And we'll just have to see how this turns out over the next couple of days.
Yeah, and quite significant, you know, that the missile strikes are happening when Antonio Guterres was visiting. No other world leader has experienced that because he represents the rest of the world, which is why it is even more significant. Julian, I just want to follow up on those refugees expected in the UK from Ukraine and if they have started arriving and what the update is.
Yes, they have. So the Homes for Ukraine scheme, really a late scheme that in terms of Britain, again, wanting to be the leader of the Western alliance and being a strong ally to Volodymyr Zelensky, they have been in terms of finance, in terms of delivering the ambulances, the fire engines and all of the aid that they need. But in terms of getting the refugees in the ground, Britain have been very, very slow. Homes for Ukraine is some sort of sponsorship scheme that's littered with bureaucracy and checks and balances. It was launched about 6 weeks ago now. According to the latest data from the Home Office, about 71,000 visas have been approved via this scheme, but thus far only about 21,000 Ukrainians have been able to come into this country and into Britain's home. And if you compare that to the millions of people that are currently in places like Hungary and Poland, the number is pretty palpable. In fact, there were some protests outside Parliament earlier this week from humanitarian Britons who were really disappointed that despite seemingly passing all the checks, they haven't been successful in being able to house some of these refugees. So I think the British government have been pretty lucky and fortunate that they've been helping in so many ways, that the fact that they're not taking these refugees in abundance hasn't really been talked much about in the global press. But I think 21,000 refugees is a pretty shocking number, considering the bulk of this crisis is being felt in Eastern Europe by countries that are not as wealthy as Britain.
Yeah, and I'm sure the criticism is even heavier because of the new migrant policy, the plan signed with Rwanda to send refugees back to the country.
It absolutely is. In terms of this Rwanda scheme, which is a little bit of a red herring, but it is important because it does discuss Britain, because Britain is a very small island. Britain does have its own domestic challenges. Unfortunately, the cost of living crisis is particularly acute to Britain because of Brexit. Inflation is running at a 3-decade high. The International Monetary Fund has put Britain as being the worst economic performer next year in the G7. And there are local elections taking place next week. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has a lot to juggle with, and he knows that because of his overwhelming success at the ballot box in 2019, the majority of Britons voted for him because they wanted to get Brexit done, and Brexit was about shutting borders, essentially. So they've opened it slightly for the Ukrainians, but when it comes to the serious issue of refugees coming across the channel into Britain, the government have decided that sending them off to Rwanda is the best thing to do. That has come up under intense scrutiny, criticism. There have been so many words that have been floating about, ungodly being one of them. The British government are going to face significant legal challenges. There are 2 legal challenges that have been put forward to the High Court, which Priti Patel and the government are going to have to tussle with. But there are lots of domestic issues that Britain are going through at the moment. Another one of them is the sleaze that is engulfing Westminster at the moment. A Tory MP viewing very inappropriate material in the House of Commons in front of female staff. A couple of Tory MPs in the past couple of weeks have faced criminal charges for indecent behaviour with minors. There is a lot going on at the moment, which is why some observers, Amarachi, are worried that perhaps Boris Johnson, trying to go head-to-head with Putin, has bitten off more than he can chew. If Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin's nuclear threat is only true by 1%, that 1% is a significant issue to Britons and Britain, especially when, unfortunately, Britain is run by headlines that don't necessarily tell the truth. Russians are making significant progress, and unfortunately, Britain is at the right front and centre of this Western alliance. So if anything does, flare Russia in the wrong direction, it could have serious consequences for the millions of people that live in this country.
Juliana, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. Great analysis you have provided this morning. Thanks again. And see you later.
Thank you, Amarachi. Thank you.
And we were just talking now about the the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres leaving Ukraine, and then the Russian military airstrikes, the missiles hitting parts of Kiev today. Just as he finished his conversations with Ukraine's government, Antonio Guterres, on his way out of Ukraine, he left the capital early this morning. Thursday's blast, however, heard soon after he completed talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky, highlighted concerns that Kyiv still remains vulnerable to Russian heavy weaponry. Ukrainian officials say Russia fired 2 missiles into Kyiv. One of them struck the lower floors of a 25-story residential building, injuring at least 10 people. And now we understand 1 person has been reported dead. Mr. Guterres back to New York. We have more on updates coming up after the break. Plus, in Albania, you stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Bulgaria's Deputy Prime Minister Aston Vasiliev says the country can replace its entire Russian gas supply from other sources and will not face a gas shortage in the coming winter. Russia's Gazprom, as we remember, cut Bulgaria and Poland from its gas on Wednesday for refusing to pay in rubles. Bulgaria consumes about 3 billion cubic meters of gas per year, of which over 90% comes from Russia. Referring to a letter sent by Gazprom asking for payment in rubles, Vasiliev's colleague and Energy Minister Alexander Nikolov said no sensible person will sign it. In March, Moscow issued a decree stipulating that energy buyers must open accounts at Gazprom Bank to make payments in euros or dollars, which would then be converted to rubles and paid to gas supplier Gazprom. The European Commission said EU companies should continue to pay the currency agreed in their contracts with Gazprom, 97% of which are in euros or in dollars.
No supply problem even in the winter. And today we actually managed to get a number of practical steps agreed. There is a regional task force that is going to be set up in Bulgaria to optimize not only the gas deliveries to Bulgaria, but to the entire region using the infrastructure that we have.
And actually, since the letter implies that if it is signed, it becomes a part of the existing contract, it refers to the entire contract, which means till expiration. So all potential future claims or arbitrage claims or whatever will not have the valid ground, which if you look at it only from a corporate perspective, there's not a sensible person that would sign this.
Well, that sounds like, talk back to Russia. No sensible person will sign that deal. Business correspondent Ini John McQuarrie is here to make sense of what just happened. So no sensible person will sign a deal with Russia to buy gas in
when
rubles.
I heard that, no sensible person, I don't know about that, because we hear that one of Germany's biggest energy firm has signed to follow with that system. So I don't know about sensible.
What are you trying to say? What are you trying to say?
I'm not saying anything.
Okay,
it's
great.
Uniper that has signed, that's one of Germany's biggest energy firm. They have signed, to follow up with that system and do, as Russia has said, paying. Well, they will pay in euros and it will be converted, just as you have read, it will be converted. So, I mean, I don't know about sensible person, because I guess at this time, a lot of countries are just trying to protect themselves, even Germany themselves. I mean, it's been proven by a lot of analysts that if they cut off their gas supply from Russia, I mean, they will fall into a recession. So when you talk about sensible, I don't know. But it's interesting to hear Bulgaria say this. But, that story hasn't ended yet, because they have already paid, and so you still have to follow up with that. I mean, Bulgaria, because, I mean, if they have already paid for a contract, and the contract initially did not have a payment of rubles as part of the agreement, then, certainly there should be consequences for breach of contracts in that case.
So I'm wondering, to the common eye, you pay in rubles, you get your gas. What could you lose if you pay in rubles? What would happen to the Bulgarian economy or to Poland or to the other countries? Russia is saying you have to pay in rubles, not in euros or in dollars.
So what will happen is I think essentially what this is all about is countries want to force the hands of Russia, to stop the war. So they don't want to indirectly fund the war. Because if you follow because you're still going to pay in euros or pay in dollars, but then there's a system that will now convert it to rubles, so you'll be paying money into the economy of Russia, you'll be strengthening, the economy. That means all the sanctions we're talking about will not have that much effect. So that means they can have more money to either manufacture or get weapons, to continue the war. So that is the train, and that's what the EU is trying to stop. But, at this point, I guess it's more of self-preservation for economies. Do you want your economy to crash? Because you don't want, because you want to stop Russia, or because you want to support Ukraine in this case, to stop the war between Russia and Ukraine. So that's, I guess, is the backstory. But it's a very tight one for a lot of economies. And now we see that Germany's one of their biggest energy buyers has succumbed to it, and it doesn't look so good.
Yeah, and it's a fine line, really, to cross morality and, trying to keep up with your economy. Bulgarians are not going to understand when they don't have any gas in the winter. A lot of people will blame the government in the end. I know that this is really tough.
Exactly.
Because gas is also used for other things as well.
Yeah, of course, it's used for energy, for manufacturing, for heat, it's not like in Nigeria when we can do without heat because we have the natural heat. Over there, remember, I think some people who left Ukraine, some of them, I think they died in the cold or they had some problems with their health.
Well, because they were out for hours on end.
Exactly. So, that's just to show the extreme weather in that part of the world. It's not the same thing as we have back here in Nigeria. We can do without heat,
you know, and manage with the material.
So as the rest of the world feels the impact of the war in Ukraine, I think you have some interest in South Africa, right?
Yeah. Well, it just happens to be South Africa now. It's actually everywhere, Africa, everywhere. So the latest report shows that the factory gate prices, you know, has gone to 14-year high. Now, what that means is the cost of products at the factory. That means just the cost of products, of producing or manufacturing products, has gone to a 14-year high. So, for instance, your dress, if it's made in South Africa, the cost of it has gone to a 14-year high because of supply chain disruptions, some of the raw materials, some of the parts of the machines that are used, maintenance of it. Those things have been disrupted because of the war. You know, they can't be shipped in, the raw materials can't be moved in. Supply of those raw materials, maybe like cotton, has been cut because of the war. They can't be moved on. So with the little that is available, everybody's scrambling for it. The prices have gone up. So, you know, this is without adding transportation, logistics, you know, to location. It's just at the factories at a 14-year high. And I must say, it's not just South Africa. You know, we've talked a lot about wheat and the products.
Food shortages.
Exactly, food shortages, food prices. In Egypt, they had to bring back a subsidy on bread. You know, they're very big on bread, you know, things like that. So it's South Africa, we have the figures now, but really it's everywhere. And that's why you had the AFDB talking about food shortages and volunteering, I think, $1.5 billion, you know, to help, and a whole lot of IMF, World Bank, everybody's coming up with
but you know what's not been talked about the most is, you know, what Nigeria is doing, you know, to buffer the impact of this food shortage, this looming food shortage that's coming to Africa and, you know, to Nigeria itself. So what are you hearing from the government?
Well, what we hear is that because of the grains, you know, the wheat and the corn, for the corn has even been a problem even before now. Yeah. So wheat was used as a substitute because corn was getting really expensive and scarce. Unfortunately, now wheat is not even available. So the president had ordered about 2 weeks ago, I think, 40,000 tons of grains from our reserve. But how far will that go? And it'll really be interesting to see the government put some intentional efforts into production. But the thing with that is, even if the government started doing something today, we will not get the result until months, maybe end of the year or next year. So I guess the best time to have done something was last year.
Calling out the government. How bold of you.
I'm just stating what the people are saying. This is what people are saying. I mean, one egg that used to be 30, 40 naira is now about 100 naira.
Yeah, now you're eating into my time with business money. We'll see you in a bit, Nini. Thanks again. And as we end the program, Russian invasion may have disrupted their lives, but 8 teenage Ukrainian athletes are still chasing their dreams of attaining international success as they continue with their trainings in Albania. The athletes, together with their 2 coaches, have been staying in the city of Elbasan since March 30. They train at the Elbasan Arena, a stadium which also has an athletics track.
But when I see the news in internet, I cry sometimes about this because it's my country, it's my home, it's my nation, and I'm very afraid about this. This war not destroyed my dream because I'm very motivated about this. I want prepare into the World Championship in Colombia and say all that Ukraine is a strong country and we are winners.
A perfect place to leave it. We are winners. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Enjoy the weekend.